Hello and welcome to Candle and Bonfire. This is a podcast and training program designed by two healers to help us and you open your minds to your heart's desires. So, if you haven't listened to episode number 2, where my sister, Dr. Anahita Navab Holden, led us through a beautiful sound bath meditation, we highly recommend you go back and check it out because I have people at work coming up to me and telling me they're still tingling and vibrating with the sensations that were emanated from the message and the sound bowls. We did one episode where I introduced what we're doing. Anahita followed it up with a beautiful cleansing guided meditation. And now we think it's time for us to appear together and have a nice discussion about these powerful concepts. So, Anna, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks. So excited to get this going. How
Me
about
too.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background before we continue?
Yeah, sure thing. So I am a clinical psychologist. I have a private practice here in Santa Barbara, California, and also specialize specifically in somatic therapy. So mind body connection, working specifically with trauma. Hey, kitty. Aw. And nervous system regulation, which I think explains a lot in terms of mental health,
Hmm.
and teach meditation and yoga in the community. So, certainly like to kind of provide a few different angles to the work. And how about you?
That's a beautiful explanation. Thank you. I'll have a couple follow-up questions also, but yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I'm Kaveh Navab. I'm a board certified anesthesiologist and with a specialization in cardiac anesthesia, cardiac and pulmonary transplant, and elective cardiac surgery. But I was always interested in neuroscience. And as you were describing the embodied emotions and neural regulation, nervous system regulation,
Mhm.
when I first discovered the brain, I was really immediately fascinated with how it is helping us or hurting us based on whatever programs or subroutines it's running. And I went into medicine and I went out of a sort of behavioral field, went into anesthesia. But now, recently, as we've been discussing, all my interests in decision making and learning how to live the kind of life we want to live have resurfaced.
Beautiful.
So I was wondering, how long have you been in practice again?
Yeah, so I've been practicing for a number of years, but in terms of my own private practice, it's been on nearly 4 years.
Nearly 4 years. And how many hours would you say approximately? Are we in the thousands or tens of thousands of hours of clinical work with patients?
Yeah, yeah, definitely in the thousands at this point, kind of
Wow.
counting, going way back.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really, really grateful and blessed to have you as a sister and to have you as a collaborator on. I think this is a very important project for ourselves and our friends in our circle.
Same to you.
Thank you. So we've been talking recently in anticipation of this conversation, and I wanted to just get a sense from you about the stuff that we've been talking about. What struck a chord the most?
Yeah, right. So we've been speaking a lot about how to get people what they really want, right? So how to get them to their desired outcome. And, we've talked about, interestingly, like kind of how to reach a sort of center point within ourselves, right? Of guiding that action towards desired outcome. So, one of the topics that we explored and would like to share with you all is around needs versus wants. And it's a topic that, in mindful self compassion, which is a program that I teach, they do, make a really helpful distinction between the two,
Hmm.
between needs and wants. And so, being, that wants might be feel a little bit more surface level, and the needs are kind of felt deeply from the body, right? And are kind of more universal needs that we all share, right? And so that distinction is useful. And then at the same time, what you and I have been chatting about is, well, then when do we sometimes get lost in the weeds trying to distinguish between a need and a want? And at the end of the day, there's really just a feeling that we have within ourselves that helps guide that action, that impulse there. And so that's what I'm, really interested in is connecting that for people, really helping them find that little life force energy within themselves that does point to this.
Yeah, I love that. I think what you described as the center point is very useful. One sentence that came to me recently that I've been sharing with people is also that expectation is the way that the human spirit shows up in our lived experience.
Hmm.
So if you imagine whether you're talking about wants or needs, expectation, wanting things to be different or needing things to be different, and seeing that there is some action that we could take potentially to increase the chances of that outcome, make me lean towards what you're describing as an embodied sense of what's wrong or what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Where if you ask someone what they want, sometimes the first answer may be, as you're describing, a little bit more of what they think the problem is. But as we start to dig deeper, we learn more about what our real motivations are. And a lot of times people don't have conversations that probe that deeply.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It can be almost just not so much in our culture and our conditioning to kind of probe deeply, to go deep in conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so it really is kind of a cultural shift or a practice that we can have, right? To be able to speak about those kind of like deeper yearnings within ourselves and really thinking of it as kind of like, what do you feel as like a full body yes, a full body no, right? That's, where you can just kind of feel it in your whole being, being able to talk about those things together.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is definitely true. The cultural norms or status quo around what topics are worth discussing, which are potentially dangerous. That if we get into it, we might bring the mood down or push people further into a conversation they don't want to have. It's not polite to probe. It's not polite to ask people questions about what's going wrong in their lives, or how are their lives not what they want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, that really is what we're after in any kind of process or curriculum of intentionally getting what you want.
Mm.
And I find that a lot of people are stuck with the sense that I don't really need to have a deeper relationship or to have more mental health or more money. I might want it, but am I really justified in wanting something more than I already have? The idea that we're already so blessed and privileged might make a lot of us feel like it's not justified to want more out of our lives or more out of ourselves or more out of our friends and family.
Right. Yeah. Kind of speaks to that idea we've mentioned together about, yeah, just feeling like, is there, a sense of kind of smallness there, playing small, keeping things feeling kind of safe in a way, actually. And yeah, so with that, there's just this sense of like what could be let go then in that situation, what could be kind of unburdened there to sort of say like, well, why not, yeah, why not keep going.
Like, who's it hurting?
Yeah.
Who's it hurting to want more? And I think part of the answer would reflexively be that it could actually hurt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you want more than you already have, that might be a source of lower self-esteem or regret about not having made certain choices in the past. It could be a kind of pressure. That's really what it comes down to. When you want something more, it's a kind of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, I think all of us, if we're not sure of what to do with that desire for more, if we don't have a clear action that we can associate with it, it might just feel better to ignore it or to dismiss it or to say something like, well, I shouldn't ask for more because I already have so much.
Right. Yeah, that little discomfort that comes up. Maybe that's the piece that's worth exploring in any given situation. Is there some agitation there around that pressure, like you're saying? That's so valuable to work with that. And can we feel that in our bodies, or is it more manifesting as thoughts? Just to notice, how is it showing up for people, that moment of really not listening to the full body yes or the full body no,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Like justifying it away or conceptualizing it away. Because when we talk about getting what we want, there's already a kind of jolt in the system. And because it's not a conversation that we really have, we kind of just go with the flow, or it is what it is. These are very popular sort of phrases. Whereas getting what you want is kind of aggressive. If someone says that I want to get what I want, it sounds almost like an entitlement. It sounds like someone who believes that they deserve to get what they want. And I think a big part of the work that we're doing here is really finding the places where we could give ourselves permission to dream, essentially. And when they say dare to dream, there's a reason it's a dare, right? It's a challenge. It's an invitation, dare to dream. It's really an acknowledgement that dreaming is not easy, that there is a kind of, there's another side to it. There, if you're dreaming about something, it means it hasn't happened yet. And so it is aspirational.
Yeah. Right. So there can be the sense of daring with that, right? A sense of like going out on a limb or feeling like there's like an expansion of yourself beyond
Totally.
the realm of comfort.
Exactly. I think that's right. I think what we know, what we're used to, it's comfortable, but to try to get what you want is ambitious and audacious and can fail. So if you apply for a job, or you ask someone out on a date, or whatever, the way that you're pivoting away from the normal routine of the day has a chance of failing. You might get rejected. Things might not work out the way you planned when you leave your front door, as it were. And so it could be very tempting to just stay in your house and not go into the world.
Right. And then it kind of comes back to the why, right? The need or want, however we want to refer to it, right? Like that there's something that makes it worth it.
Yes.
Makes it worth it to get out the door anyways and to risk, failure, rejection, right? Because otherwise it's kind of like, what is the point, right? If we don't feel that sense of why, that sense of charge within us.
Yeah. If we don't have a sense of something new being created, then it's obvious that boredom and complacency and restlessness can start to set in. And it could be argued that since everything is changing in the world, that we ourselves are also changing. And by getting what we want, by going after what we want and keeping our mind open to our heart's desires, we are actually participating in that process of change ourselves. Because as the environment changes, as our desires change, we have to also adapt to all those all those ephemeral conditions.
Right. And then there's this way in which there's an interconnectedness to with others in the world, like you're saying, where we influence each other as well through that change that we make, right? We kind of model for each other and then maybe inspire each other such that, again, like you mentioned in the past, like it's not a mutually exclusive thing where one person's success means another's failure, right? We actually can help lift each other up. And that's another way in which we influence each other in this world.
I think that's such a great segue, because for sure, this idea of a mutual admiration society has arisen during our work and thought around this topic. And if you think about it, a mutual admiration society, in the worst sense of it, could be just people who are like blowing smoke up each other's butts. But in the best case, it's really people who are giving each other welcome challenges, welcome pushes, nudges, which includes a kind of necessary judgment or supervision of each other. So that if you see something that I'm doing that rubs you the wrong way, and I stand to benefit from modifying my behavior, so you think that there's something I could be doing differently that would be better for me, better for you, and everyone else, opening up that conversation such that I can benefit from your observations of me is really, really priceless, I think, because we all have judgments of each other. And at the same time, we're not really deputized by our friends and family to comment on each other's lives. But there's no reason in principle that we can't be.
Right. And then this relates perfectly to our mini course, right? An ebook, Can We Talk, right? Can We Talk? This idea of, can we provide each other that feedback, and be able to actually create a model of interpersonal, exchange in that way that is really productive.
Yeah, there's this I was just in Deer Valley skiing, and
Yeah.
there's this yurt there. It's the Veuve Clicquot yurt, the champagne yurt. And last year when I went to this hotel for a conference, in that yurt we had a conversation about something called the Overton window, which is the range of acceptable conversation topics or the range of acceptable opinions that could be held within any given conversation, right? So it could be different if it's you and me talking. It could be different if a third person enters the conversation. Each person in their own mind has some sense of what we're allowed to talk about and what opinions we're allowed to hold in the conversation. And this is sort of where taboo starts to rear its head. If there are conversations that we can't have, and if there are opinions that we can't hold, then we start feeling the conversation becoming more and more confined and constrained, and becoming, in a way, more superficial, more safe, more sterile. But what you're describing and what we're talking about in Can We Talk is whether there's a cost associated with that, whether we're actually paying some invisible price for not being able to have certain conversations with our friends, family, and professional colleagues.
Right. It kind of almost sounds like it almost gets really like flattened down to small talk, even in a way,
Yep.
right? Even with our loved ones, right? The sense of like surface level talk that I think you and I both tend to both get a little bored by, right? Like there's only so much of that we have capacity for um, because I think we can feel that like at a certain level, like it certainly has its utility as well, because right then we can kind of get to know what's going on in each other's lives, which is super important. And then at the same time, there's almost this feeling like you can almost feel when the connection is not fully forming because of that, right? Because we just kept it right there, as opposed to like daring to have a conversation, that might actually, maybe it might push a few buttons, but it actually also, as a result, could deepen, strengthen connection.
I couldn't have put it better. I really couldn't have, because this is exactly why this podcast, this training program is such a passion project for me. I just see in my own life and in the lives of others that our internal lives are oftentimes opaque to each other, where you don't know what I'm going through and I don't know what you're going through, because the things that we're going through don't fit in to the prescribed boundaries of what a conversation's allowed to look like, or even what is a safe conversation, because I think taboo serves a purpose. And when someone says, hey, don't go there, there's a reason for it. There is some kind of a threat to mental and emotional and social stability when we venture too far beyond the pale. And so just like you were talking about the comfort zone of an individual, a group has a comfort zone too. And I think that's really what it is. How far are we willing to let this conversation veer outside of what we normally talk about or feel comfortable talking about?
Yeah. Just to notice the result of it, like what ends up happening just as an experiment. It's always worth seeing what happens, when we do veer a little bit, within the confines of, it's like everybody's kind of giving mutual consent, right? Then there's a sense of like, okay, let's do this together as a team, just kind of voyaging into a different
Yes.
terrain.
Yes, I think really knowing that the person has your best interest in mind and they know what they're talking about, those two are very important when it comes to hearing someone else's opinion of me. If someone wants to comment on my life, for instance, decisions I'm making, which is certainly part of the conversation I'd like to be having with the people in my life, there are some prerequisites. The person has to want the best for me to really be able to absorb their feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I become even more coachable, then I might even be able to learn from people who are being hostile and aggressive to me.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're being realistic, it's hard to feel safe and receptive when you're not sure that the person who's giving you advice or guidance or supervising you has your best interest in mind.
Right. Yeah, that sense of safety and sense of trust there is so important to have that.
Yeah. So I think when we say, can we talk? There's two questions. Can we talk means there's something I want to talk to you about. There's some issue that we have to address. But it also asks this other question of what are the boundaries? Can we talk about money? Can we talk about addiction? Can we talk about suicide, the sad parts of life? Can we talk about how we've had trouble getting what we want in life and we're confused and have vague discomforts about whether we're doing it right or not?
Mm-hmm.
And if we can talk about that, then we stand to gain a lot, because that disarms these kind of radioactive topics. It's like confronting your fears
Mm-hmm.
and finding out that they weren't that scary after all.
Right. Yeah. Taking away, it's like more about the anticipatory anxiety, right?
Mm.
Versus what actually happens when you have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, one other, so this was, we started really talking about wants versus needs,
Mm.
because in a way we're collapsing them down into just visions or desires or expectations. So whether you have physical or emotional, mental, financial, or social wants or needs, whatever it is that you want, there are actions that you can take to move yourself in the direction of having it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem with separating wants and needs is that wants can start to become treated as trivial. And you say, well, I don't really need that. I just want it. But that is a kind of dismissal that dismisses your desires as being important and saying they're not important, they're just desires.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's always kind of like a deeper thread you can find with a want, basically, right? You can kind of always dig a layer deeper with it and just say, like, oh, what's that mean? And there's often meaning there, right? No matter what, there's some underlying meaning behind a want.
Yeah. And if you look at all progress, you might say, did we want to discover what the human nucleus was like, or did we need to discover what the human nucleus was like? Many people, most people, are not interested in progress. Most people say things are fine as they are. Let's just keep grinding away the way that we've been doing. We've been doing fine. But people who are interested in making things even better than they already are necessarily dealing in the land of desires rather than the land of needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the other thing we were thinking about was resources, and how resources are all around us. We have physical, emotional, mental, financial, and social resources. And in a way, anytime we want more resources. We want more life. You could even say we want more life energy. We want more vitality. I mean, how useful is a bunch of friends or a bunch of money if your energy level is low, if you feel very if you still feel sad? Ultimately, that's really what you want. You want to feel a kind of vitality and enthusiasm that you try to get through the right kinds of foods, the right kinds of emotions and thoughts, and money and friends.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, those resources are Yeah, so important to think about and different kinds of them.
Yeah. And then one of the different kinds is like we were saying, whether you inherited the resource, whether it's something that was done to you, or whether you earned the resource and it was something that you did for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the resources that we have are also synonymous with the conditions that we're in. Our physical conditions, they're also our physical resources. Our
Mm.
financial conditions, those are our financial resources.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a way, when we're trying to get what we want, we're just trying to use what we have. There's nothing else to be done about it. We use what we have. This is what I'm working with. And this is what I want to make of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can be helpful to even take an inventory of what are those different resources,
Hmm.
right? And just noticing the different areas in which they emerge. And then maybe even, yeah, just noting them can be helpful to getting you towards your desired outcome. So you can like actively make use of the ones that you note.
What do you think also along those lines of other people commenting on what our resources are? Like, do you think we ever forget what our resources are and can be reminded of them by other people?
Mm. Seems like there could be some utility in it, right? In receiving those reminders in case we're not utilizing them, right? Just to be reminded of our emotional resources, our connections. Sometimes that can be really helpful. And we might have reservations about utilizing our social connections,
Mm,
but that nudge and that reminder from our loved ones can be helpful to say, like, oh no, ask that person, like utilize it.
yes. Yes. I really think the phrase getting the most out of what we have sums it all up.
Mm-hmm.
And if we include people in that, then I say, I want to get the most out of myself. I want to
Mm-hmm.
get the most out of my sister. I want to get the most out of my parents, my wife. It doesn't mean that those people out of whom I'm getting more are suffering as a
Right.
result of me getting more out of them.
Right.
There is actually a kind of mutual uplifting that when I get the most out of myself, when I get the most out of you, everything gets better. There's no one who necessarily has to suffer
Mm-hmm.
in that process of us getting more out of each other and more out of life.
Right, exactly. If there is a mutual benefit there and mutual uplifting, right? Versus, I think the alternative would be, right, if someone is being taken advantage of right now, but that's not what you're saying. You're saying actually, you know, with proper boundaries in place, basically, right? If somebody lets you know, like, oh, I don't really feel up for providing this information right now, but whatnot. But like, if there's that communication there to be able to ascertain what feels like a healthy exchange of resources between us and everyone's on board with that, then absolutely, yeah, there is a sense of mutual uplifting.
Yeah, I think it was really insightful what you said about people feeling reluctant to use their connections
Mm-hmm.
because it's an intuition that kind of reflects our insistence or emphasis on individualism, where we shouldn't use our connections, we should just do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But that is somewhat antisocial on the surface of it because why is being of service or getting service from someone else potentially problematic?
Mm-hmm.
To me, what you're saying is that our connections are just among our resources,
Right.
just like our money, our intellect, our emotional profile, and our body. These are the five domains of resources that we have available to us. And the actions that we can take to get what we want are ultimately going to be a physical, emotional, mental, financial, or social action.
Right. Yeah, right. So you can always notice what is the reservation or hesitation behind using any one of those resources. It could be worth exploring.
Yeah, like what price are you not willing to pay? In some ways, maybe asking someone for help, maybe, using your connections and asking someone for help is a price that a person's not willing to pay. because of some commitment they have to doing things themselves,
Mm-hmm.
or to not owing anyone else anything, or to not seeming helpless.
Right.
But to me, I think when this becomes clear that a person is not getting what they want because they're not asking for it, then the person can make the decision. Am I willing? What's more important to me? To insist on my individualism and my independence, or getting this thing?
Right. Make a call, make a choice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think actually, when you talk about making a call or making a choice, I also think of that as owning it,
Mm-hmm.
owning the decision to either ask for help or not ask for help. And then if I decide to not ask for help, I got to be fine not getting the outcome that I could potentially get if I was asking for help.
Yeah, you got it.
And then there's something else came to mind, which was, what connections are we not allowed to use? Like we were talking yesterday about resources that we earned ourselves, whether it be money or connection, versus resources that we inherited or were given to us. And we were talking about whether it makes a difference ultimately.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I noticed for myself, if there were financial resources given to me, I might be more likely to save that versus there's psychologically, for some reason, if I earn that financial resource myself, I might feel more willing to spend it.
It's
There's
very
something in
interesting.
that where maybe there's more of a sense of like, okay, I made it myself, so I can spend it. But if someone gave it to me, then I need to make sure I save it. Like there's something in that.
That's so interesting. I agree. And I can see also when that could get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
If you needed to buy something, but you were reluctant to buy it because of the origins of the funds, then that could be something that may also fall into this category of being willing to pay the price,
Right.
both in dollars, but also in the fact that these are not dollars that I earned. That's another price that you might have to be willing to pay in order to get something accomplished.
Right, exactly. So it's like just an example like that, like noticing that barrier, even as subtle as it is, like I didn't even think of it until you mentioned the topic to me. And so like just increasing that awareness around it is so useful.
I love the word barrier because honestly, that's what we're talking about. The question is like, you're trying to get what you want in life, presumably, and what's in your way? Because you may not have any enemies. There might be no one who's actually out to get you. And yet, you may not get what you want. So, where could the barriers possibly be?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we quickly find that a lot of them are inside of us. Overthinking things, perfectionism, or vague commitments that we're not even really aware of until they're brought to our attention
Mm-hmm.
through some questions and discussions like the ones that we're having, where we might think, oh, I would be willing to do this thing differently in my life in order to get some outcome. I would be willing to start a podcast and training program in order to have this conversation in public and learn what other people's perspectives are about this topic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
But but starting a podcast is not super easy, so you got to have a reason to do it.
Exactly. Yes.
And it's like that's the price you're willing to pay. That's the action you're willing to take in order to advance some potential preference.
Right. And there's a sense of it being worth that price. Yeah. Doing it anyways.
Yeah, I love the idea of happily paying the price
Right.
so that you don't think it's a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately that's what I think of as uh, having your cake and eating it too, where you're happy to pay the price, happy to make the podcast,
Mm-hmm.
not feeling like this is a sacrifice, what we're doing, happy to do it and have good come out of it for both the creators and the audience.
Yeah.
That's like the ideal of business, right? The perfect business is the one that benefits both the creators of a product as well as the audience members.
Everyone involved, both creators and receivers. Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the website and what people can do to find out more about what we're doing.
Yes. So our website is candleandbonfire.com, and we have a few different offerings there. So we've got our mini course that we mentioned earlier, Can We Talk? And then we've got our one-on-one coaching as well as group coaching program that'll be launched later this year, as well as make sure to grab the free ebook right there on the home page to be able to have a snapshot of the work that we do.
I love it. Do you want to send some people to your website also? Do you want to tell people about what you're doing?
Yeah, sure thing. So mine is primarily psychotherapy, but also different offerings such as Reiki, as well as yoga, meditation, and I have free meditations on there. So you feel free to check that out at AnahitaHoldenPhD.com.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just wanted to run one more thought by you to see if you like the idea. Listening to the first two episodes, it almost felt like there was like a dialing up with the first episode that was like, hey, you can get what you want, pay the price, do the thing, take the action. And then a dialing down, dialing back of just relaxing, being okay with how things are, finding the grounding and really being at peace, really like manufacturing peace, both manufacturing urgency on one hand and manufacturing peace on the other.
Yeah, interestingly, I see it as kind of like that meditation was, grounding as the foundation, right? And then finding your inner fire, finding your strength from that place. Yeah. So there was kind of this practice of collapsing and like really showing that with the body, which a lot of us enter into without even realizing somehow, right?
True.
That shame stance. And then unfurling from that. So practicing like coming up notch by notch through your spine, bringing the shoulders back, right? Lifting the heart space and feeling the face kind of open up a bit. So there's that practice of kind of like emerging from that space, but
Beautiful.
yeah, really foundationally coming from a place of grounding to find that sense of strength.
It reminds me of the phoenix too, the way you described it,
Mm-hmm.
coming up from the ashes stronger, intentionally embodying a sort of defeated pose,
Right.
doing it intentionally, even though we so often do it unintentionally. Just
Yeah,
do it on purpose,
exactly.
almost like fail on purpose, feel what it feels like to feel the weight of life, and then practice
Yeah.
re-emerging from it.
Yeah, that's a somatic tool that we can definitely like kind of get into in for future episodes where practice that shape, like you just said, practice that, collapse so that even if you go into it like 5-10%, then you have more of a sense of it and then more awareness somatically around what is it like when I come into that shape, what starts happening in my nervous system, and then coming out of it. And then we do this practice of like going in 5%, going out 5%. And then with that, there's a sense of like modulation as if we almost have like the dial on a mixer, right? DJ, such that you're able to kind of go in and go out and have influence over your own nervous system response.
So beautiful. I mean, it's almost like what I was trying to describe about the first episode and the second episode. You said even the second episode has the up and down inside of it itself.
Right,
And
right.
it sounds like a cycle. It sounds like a cycle or you know, you have to, even to be, I don't know, violence comes to mind, but you have to pull your fist back in order to punch, right? It seems like this keeps showing up in life, the
Yeah.
naturalness of ups and downs.
Exactly. Yeah. Peter Levine in somatic experiencing, he always brings that toy, which I wish I had, that one that kind of goes expansion, contraction, that like
Yes.
colorful rainbow toy. And that's exactly what it is, right? There's always this ebb and flow, and you see it throughout all of biology and life too, right? That this is the rhythm. Yeah.
It's a pulsation.
Exactly.
You have it in your nervous system, the vibrations, you have it in your cardiopulmonary system, your heartbeat, and your respiratory rate.
Yes.
Definitely, you have to have the in and the out. But it feels like if we're not conscious of it in life, we're upset when we have the out. We only want the in.
Right. Right. We have to learn that that pendulation, we call it, is is the process, is life energy that ebbs and flows. That's the only way it really can go. It needs to ebb and flow.
Yeah. And it's related also, I think, to being in your comfort zone, like leaving it and coming back in, leaving it and coming back in, and leaving it. And that way, expanding the comfort zone ultimately, but through the cyclical entering and exiting,
Exactly.
pushing it and then recovering, pushing it and then recovering.
Right. In little bits, manageable little bits. Yeah.
And I think if we don't do it on purpose, it still kind of happens, like life does it to us. But what we're doing and what we're creating with the podcast and the training program and the coaching is an intentional paying of a price for the reaping of a reward.
Right.
Being pushed and being willing to be pushed and pushing ourselves in order to then have an even more expansive comfort zone. Well, I love it. I appreciate you so much for everything you've done in terms of what I would call a welcome nudge.
Right back at you. Yeah, I know you just said, like, we've got to do this podcast. This is the next thing, and so here we are. It's happening. We're so excited to have everyone listening and watching.
Absolutely, yeah. This is definitely the Mutual Admiration Society taking form, sort of a culture, like you described, a new sort of culture that we're trying to emanate, that we are creating by having, I think, the kind of conversation that is, like you said, a role model for what could be possible. And we didn't get into too many of our personal stories today, but I think it might be an opportunity in the next times. Do you think you have any ideas of what we might want to talk about on future episodes?
Yeah, I mean, there's the one, speaking of taboo topics, right? There's both of our fertility journeys, which is
Yes.
super, I think interesting. First of all, that two siblings, both struggling with fertility issues and then being so open, both of us talking about it through social media with each
Yes.
other, with our communities. And I think it's been really cool to see people's reactions of like, oh, we can talk about something that affects a lot of people, really, but it's also, it also kind of expands out into things like, hardship, kind of chronic hardship, right? And all kinds of different lessons that we've learned along the way. I think that's one of the great ones that we can explore together in a future episode.
Oh man, I can't wait. Yeah, because ultimately we're talking about getting what you want and what happens when you don't.
Right.
Right? What do you do when you don't get your way? Because we all have an inner child, and we all know what it is to get dysregulated and to throw a temper tantrum or to pout or to do, in some ways, behaviors that actually make bad situations even worse.
Right. Right.
And so I think this conversation has a lot to offer both us and the listeners when it comes to generating greater insight about the ways in which we respond to disappointment.
Right. Right. You got it. So that'll be an exciting episode coming up here.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, I can't wait. And again, go to the website, candleandbonfire.com. And if you thought this was useful, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the like, and share with your friends. We'll see you soon.